On this podcast, we talk often about life, loss, and what truly matters. And part of that is taking care of the life we've been given. Did you know that cardiovascular disease and stroke are two of the leading causes of death in the U.S.? Yet 80% of these can actually be prevented. That's why I've partnered with Lifeline Screening. They offer a package of 4 quick, painless screenings for just $159. It's one appointment at one of over 14,000 locations across the country. No needles, no hospital gowns, no hassle. Just simple tests that can bring peace of mind or provide early detection. Lifeline Screening has already screened more than 10 million people, so don't wait. A simple screening can change the rest of your life. Click the link in my show description to schedule your appointment today. And now for today's episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Grief Observed podcast. My name's Brad Morrell. I'm your host. And if you'd like to join me for an episode, you can find me on Facebook, TikTok, or Gmail, all under the name of Grief Observed Podcast. Just message me or send me an email and we will get you on an episode. My guest today is Sydney from TikTok, and she does a lot in lifestyle, motherhood, and Bible content on TikTok. And she wanted to come on the podcast today to speak about grief and death from a biblical perspective. So welcome, Sydney. How are you?
Hi, thank you so much. Really happy to be here. I'm doing great.
Good, good. Yeah, we've had some discussions on some wild stuff, and I'm glad to have you on and glad to have you as a friend. And I'm just really happy to dig in and just see what you have to say as far as death and grief. And maybe we'll kick around several topics, but I know you've got several that's on your heart already. So I'll just let you take over.
Yeah, I want to introduce the topic of death in the Bible. What does it mean to obviously be alive first, and then what does it mean to die for the believer and for the non-believer? So, just as a way of introduction, there's 3 questions that every human has to ask. And this is one major thing that makes us different from the animals. We question our origin. Where did we come from? We question who we are, our meaning, and we question our destination. Where are we going? So we can apply that very easily to life and death. How did life get here? That's a question of ontology. And who are you? Who am I as a person? What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be me?
Hmm.
And where am I going? What happens when I die? See, animals, they don't ask these questions. They don't ponder life. They may have different levels of intelligence, like the level of a 2-year-old or something like that, depending on the type of animal, or it might be a bird brain. Like my chickens, they can't figure out how to jump out of the fence whenever they hop into it. So we want to apply these questions because everybody asks them. Who am I? How did I get here? Where am I going?
Hmm. I do ask the question of who am I to a lot of my clients. Like if you were to describe yourself more so than your job or your title, such as mom, who are you? And most people, even in their 40s and 50s, and even probably higher, cannot answer that question well. And a lot of times I state, to know who you are, I think you have to know who you're not.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because we all go through character changes and different defining points in our life. Right now, I'm new to being a mother. So that's a new identity for me. And, in application to your podcast, sharing about grief and death of a loved one can really change you as a person. You have a before this person and an after this person. And you have that
Yes.
space of time that during that person that you'll always treasure in your heart and you kind of live with that. Hopefully, you're able to keep that person in your heart and in your memory for the rest of your life. But there's always that really terrible part of that after. What happens now that they're gone to you?
Mm, yeah. Yeah, it does change the way we look at life and the way we look at relationship and definitely the way we look at our own mortality. There's a
Hmm.
lot of people I feel like that don't think about their own mortality until they experience the death of a loved one.
Yeah. I think our society, just in my opinion, skips grief. They skip death. It's all in movies and it's blood and gore, but people don't like to acknowledge that one day they themselves are not going to be here anymore. And what does that mean? People just want to live for the moment. They don't live for eternity.
Yeah, and when we look from the Bible, one of my favorite verses talks about how it's better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting. And I'm like, how is that? It takes a while before you can consume that verse, but when you think about when I go to a funeral and I'm looking at a casket or a person in a casket, there's the realization that one day that's going
Mm,
to be me. And I think that's what it's about is realizing that this life is not forever, not this earthly life that we have. There is something beyond, but what is that? And are you
yeah.
living life fully right now while you have it? It's
Yeah.
precious.
Life is precious. So I want to start today in Romans 5, as I feel like the New Testament is a good place to start. We will skip over to the Old Testament after this, but I just want to start today in Romans 5 and verse 12, which says, therefore, just as through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned.
Hmm. So what does that mean to you, Sydney?
I think it means we don't have sin without death, and you don't have death without sin. I think they're mutually exclusive. So that would be the reason in Romans that St. Paul is writing to them about Adam and the sin that entered the world through Adam. So, as it says, through one man, that would be Adam's sin entered into the world. And up until the point of Jesus, who is the second Adam, Jesus could be the only person to conquer that, to defeat sin and defeat death.
It's hard to imagine life without death at the point I'm at, and that potential, I guess, was there in the garden, but things went awry, right?
I know. So I'll read on verse 17 here of Romans 5. For if by the transgression of the one, death reigned through the one, much more those who receive the abundance of grace and of the gift of righteousness will reign in life through the one, Jesus Christ. So we have the one through death, and then we have the one to life. The one through death was Adam, and then the one through life is Jesus. So I feel it's very important that we start there, that we know what Adam did and what he didn't do, because that is our lineage. We are connected to Adam through our human history, and that is why we all experience death, because Adam had the problem of sin that entered into the world. It impacted all of us as humans. So it's unavoidable.
Yeah, I think a lot of people look at life as forever and that death is something that they can avoid it. And I think that's how you look into the world and see that people are living just however they want, thinking that tomorrow's always going to come. How many people have made bad decisions that lead to their physical death just because of, quite frankly, being careless and thinking that this won't hurt me, whatever this is.
Right. It is easy to only think about what feels good right now. What do I want to do right now? But that's a sin focused setting of our mind, because, we're fleshly and our minds want to go there because our minds are part of our body. But I'll read the next chapter in Romans 6, verse 8. This is the instructions for a Christian. Now, if we have died with Christ, we believe that we shall also live with him. Knowing that Christ, having been raised from the dead, is never to die again, death no longer is master over him. For the death that he died to sin once for all. But the life that he lives to God. Even so, consider yourselves to be dead to sin, but alive to God in Christ. So we're instructed to live dead.
Hmm.
as so, it's very paradoxical because it's the opposite of what the world would tell us to do, is to just live for right now.
Sure.
But you're actually living to your death rather than dying to live. So,
Mm.
because Christ died for us and was raised from the dead, we are able to die to sin and be alive in Him. And now it may not make sense to some people. Most people, I would imagine, that just sounds like a riddle. Like, how can you die while you're alive? It doesn't make sense. But whenever
Yeah.
you have the knowledge and the wisdom from the Holy Spirit, when you receive that, then things that appear foolish actually are wisdom, is true wisdom.
Mm. Do you feel like you've always had this mindset as far as how to interpret this or how to maybe interpret your own life as far as the value of it from an earthly perspective versus a heavenly perspective?
When I was a child, probably starting around the age of 6, and then I was saved and I came to know Christ when I was 7. So around that time, I was contemplating eternity. I know that sounds very unusual. What child contemplates eternity? But I'm not kidding. I would sit and focus. I would concentrate. I would close my eyes and I would hold my breath and just try to imagine. I would try to imagine eternity, and I
Mm.
would try to like hold a second of time without time. And of
Mm.
course, it's impossible, but I vividly remember trying to do that and just like holding my breath and trying to connect. Really, what I was doing was trying to connect to God. Um, but yeah, it sounds so odd, but I have had that mindset since I was a child, since I was able to rationalize things and contemplate eternity. I mean, there's adults, there's people going about their lives right now that don't even have an inner monologue, much less have contemplated or regularly contemplate eternity. But that is something that was instilled in me by my parents too, because we had pets growing up. And so when I was around that age as well, we lost a little dog to a car in our front yard, and we saw it happen, and like that just kind of was like a whoa moment as a child, to see death happen before your eyes, even though it's just an animal. He was a little Ernie. We really loved him. He was our little puppy.
It's so ironic that you're mentioning this because literally in my last episode, I stated that we were talking about how do you teach children to grieve well and how do you
Mm,
notice how they're grieving. And I mentioned the fact that sometimes the loss of an animal is the first loss a child incurs,
yeah,
and they can learn a lot from it. I don't think we should protect uh, completely in that. And it's
right.
interesting that you're mentioning that was one of the first impactful losses for you.
Yeah. And I also remember maybe a year or two later, it might have been 8 or 9. The years are kind of fuzzy. I was visiting my grandma because I spent weeks with her at a time because I was homeschooled and I liked spending time with her. And whenever you're a certain age, the people around you just start dying.
Mm.
And so that was early on in her losses. She lost, I think, a sister-in-law. I can't remember, or maybe a close friend. But anyway, she took me to the funeral home. And I remember walking in there and seeing this woman's body in the casket. And I was like, majorly impacted by that moment.
Yeah.
I can't remember her name. I'm just have to ask my mom who it was, if she even knows who it was. But that was probably the first dead body I saw. And it wasn't a scene of massive mourning. It was just a wow, yeah, this lady was old, and she I think she was a believer, kind of everybody in that small town is, but not literally maybe, but um yeah, it was just one of those moments. I'll always remember that lady in her casket.
Yeah, it's I can remember several funerals that I went to whenever I was younger, and I just, oh my gosh, if my parents told me that we had to go to a funeral, I was like, no, I don't want to go. I don't
Yeah.
think it's anything that anyone ever wants to do.
Yeah, of course.
But it does make you realize the reality that this is a short time for us all, right? It's literally
Mhm.
dust in the wind. We are floating through and it's quick. It is quick.
Right. Yeah, our flesh is our main focus. How do I eat? How do I sleep? I need to drink some water. We're very focused on our bodies, our flesh. And that's just, how things are. But whenever you become a Christian and you're tuned into spiritual things, you're going to be tuned into a different side of things. You'll see a different perspective. So let me read Romans 8,
Yeah.
and we'll do just 6 through 8. For the mind is set on the flesh is death, but the mind set on the spirit is life and peace. Because the mind set on the flesh is hostile toward God, for it does not subject itself to the law of God, for it is not even able to do so. And those who are in the flesh cannot please God. So, like I said, whenever you have your mind set in the spirit, even if you are encountering death, which we all do, there's life there and there's peace. So it's a
Mm.
major difference from the mind that is on the death, the mind that is fleshly, because it isn't going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's different whenever you have this perspective outside of death. Like when you know that there's something more out there waiting. It I guess takes a lot of the fear out of dying that there's something more.
Right. And even, the whole earth experiences death. We were talking about animals. I think we're very disconnected from death and suffering in a modern society. We don't really, we don't like to think about where did the meat come from in the grocery store. Well, it didn't
Mhm.
just exist.
Right?
It didn't pop into existence. It came from a farm, hopefully.
Right, right.
So all of creation, it says in Romans, is groaning and suffering, and that's all from the death that entered through Adam. So since Adam all the way up to this point, the whole earth is groaning. It says in Romans 8:18, for I consider the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. So even though we experience grief and just the hardest, worst things in our life, there's better things to come. If you just think about it compounded, it's exponential. I think God's kingdom works in exponents of 10 to 100 to a million. So you could be feeling 100x grief on earth, for example. Well, this verse is saying the sufferings at this present time, say 100x, are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. So think of God taking that grief by 100x and multiplying it into glory by a million times. It's
Yeah.
exponential, it's eternal.
Whenever you look at visual cues from the earth, say, like I love to look at the four seasons, and it is
Yeah.
almost like this, like we are in the beginnings of death in the fall. Like you see what was kind of whittling away to nothing. And then winter is just this period of cold and dark and truly death. And then you have this bounce back in the spring, right? And then
Hmm.
you look at summer as being kind of flourishing and enjoyment and things like that. I think it's a really good picture of life and death, but also of renewal. And
Yeah.
you're talking about life in Christ. Um, when we die here on earth, there's a finality to at least our earthly bodies that you would think that winter is it. But then when spring pops up here on earth, it's a great vision of truly a renewal in Christ.
Yeah. And even in death, whenever things die and decompose into the ground, that is what flourishes onto the next generation of growth. So, for example, whenever you we're coming up on Thanksgiving, and the story that I was taught is Squanto taught the pilgrims whenever they plant corn into the ground to dig a hole and put a fish in the hole. And that dead fish is going to give the nutrients that corn stalk needs to grow.
Hmm.
So everything in the earth has a cycle of life and death. It's
Yes.
the circle of life, you know.
Right. Right.
It's really important that everybody knows that. And so whenever people and animals and plants and whatever die, it's not going to be a shock. And I think some people, they just ignore it and they avoid it and they numb out. They numb out with substances, they numb out with food. Food is a substance. The internet, pornography, all these things that can be used as a drug for your brain to numb out and ignore the reality, because the reality is we're all going to die and everything around us is constantly dying and hopefully getting better at some point. But ultimately everything is going to die. That's just the cycle and the circle of life.
Yeah, it is. And I think a lot of people aren't willing to face that, as we've stated already.
Yeah. So let me read one more verse here in Romans and then we'll hop over to Hebrews.
Sure.
This is chapter 8, verse 19. For the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself also will be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. And not only this, but also we ourselves, having the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our body. So there's a lot of groaning here. There's a lot going on, groan and suffering. And I have a note here in my Bible that says, pain is nature.
Hmm.
Because I feel like without pain, you don't really have life. Like it's natural to feel pain. It's natural to grieve. It's natural to suffer. As terrible as it may be, how else would you know if something was good if you couldn't experience bad?
Yeah. Whenever you get to verses like in Matthew 24, it's talking about the earth pangs, and we know that it's speaking about the end of time. How do you feel like that plays into the groanings of earth and things of that nature, like and death and finality?
I think labor takes a long time. If you think about childbirth, just my personal experience,
Right?
um, people could be in prodromal labor, which is like a false labor and a kind of labor that doesn't help the baby come out, basically, and you're just in pain and suffering. I
Hmm.
experienced that. It was for days. It was terrible. And I don't know, I couldn't have done anything differently than what I did do. I did everything right as far as I was aware. My midwife told me what to do and all the research I did. I was in prodromal labor for days. And the labor pains of the earth, I think, can take up, obviously, I would say up to 1,000 or 2,000 years.
Yeah.
So it's obviously a very long process, and Christ does speak about, the basically things ramping up, the earthquakes and natural events. What are the other natural events that are listed? I know earthquakes are one of them, but earthquakes do remind me a lot of contractions in birth pain because it's like the earth is squeezing and then opening up,
Yeah.
and people die in earthquakes
Sure.
also, obviously.
Sure.
So it is kind of indicative of, wow, the more earthquakes there are, probably the closer we are to the end. And I think statistically, I'd have to check, but I'm pretty sure I have read that statistically earthquakes have increased in the last decade.
Yeah,
People,
you
of course,
can.
they want to point to other reasons, but I would say
Sure.
that's the reason.
Yeah, you can go out and research. I don't know, it's one of the government organizations online, and it shows how many earthquakes happen in a day. And believe it or not, it's like at least 50 earthquakes every single day.
Wow.
And, we don't think about it and we don't hear about it unless it's like a big one.
Right.
And I think that, the Bible talks about God's patience and waiting and wanting all to come to Christ. And I know that that's why, like you were talking about with labor pains and maybe false labor pains or what was the title of it?
Prodromal labor. So
Okay.
basically, it's like labor that doesn't progress.
Okay. And so I'm sitting there thinking about how earthquakes happen, but I feel like it's because God is being patient for all to come.
Yeah.
Um, but one day that final earthquake is going to happen, and but I think that's why people go out and live however they want. They feel like
Hmm.
it's never going to come, right? We've been talking about uh, Jesus coming back for decades, and
Yeah.
people are just like, well, it's never going to happen, and not in my lifetime. So I'll go live it up, thinking that they may have forever, that they're going to live till 80 or 90 years old. But like my best friend when he passed away he was 38 years old, and totally unexpected. So I don't
Mhm.
think that you can just live however you want, hoping to, I guess, ask for repentance at the end of an old age, 80, 90 years old.
Right.
I think it's something that we all have to prepare for now, because if Jesus does not come back in my lifetime, um, then death will occur, period.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think any of us should count on getting a last rites, time in our deathbeds surrounded by our family. I mean, that's
No,
best case scenario. How often does that actually happen?
you're
Not that
right.
often.
And I've got a family friend that actually happened to, and literally this man accepted Christ on his deathbed. And you're right, not many times does that happen. And you think, wow, what an opportunity and a blessing that this person got that opportunity, but it doesn't happen often, and it's not something that I feel like people should count on.
Yeah. I think we should all count on maybe dying tomorrow.
Yeah,
Oop, like who literally, who knows what could happen tomorrow?
sure. And the Bible states that we shouldn't expect our next breath, right?
Hmm.
It's a blessing to have it, but we shouldn't expect it.
Yeah. And that's why Christ's death is so important because even whenever he was about to be arrested, Jesus was praying, Father, not your will, not my will, but your will be done. If it's possible, let this cup of death pass from me. Not
Yeah.
even Jesus wanted to die. And it's my belief that he could have said, no, I'm not going to do this because he says, I offer my life willingly. It's not the Romans or the Jews who take my life, but I give myself up freely. So
Yeah.
because he was a willing sacrifice.
I remember an old hymn whenever I was growing up, and it said, he could have called 10,000 angels.
It's a good one. That one makes me cry.
It is. That's a fantastic song. I was sitting here thinking, as you can see, I'm in my music studio. I was sitting there thinking, man, that would be a cool one to like bring back and just kind of revamp a little bit,
Yeah.
And but yeah, he could have said, no, I
Mhm.
don't want to do this, but for you and me to live eternally, it had to
Right.
happen.
Yeah. So I'm gonna hop over now to Hebrews since we talked a little bit about Genesis and we talked about Adam and sin entering through the world. So we'll start in Hebrews 9 here. Um, we'll go to verse 26.
Sure.
He, meaning Jesus, would have needed to suffer once, sorry, would have needed to suffer often since the foundation of the world. But now, once at the consummation of the ages, he has been manifested to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. So, throughout the last millennia, people had been making sacrifices. So as soon as sin entered the world after Adam, the very first people, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, on and on, they were instructed to make sacrifices to the Lord. And that was for a temporary covering of sin. But because Jesus laid himself down, he was that once and for all sacrifice. He was the sacrifice of the ages to put away sin. So that's a permanent sacrifice. So that's why we're not offering up the blood of bulls and lambs anymore, as it says in here in Hebrews. So Jesus is that eternal blood. He is that flesh. He is that sacrifice because that's how everything happens in the earth. Everything is a pro and a con. There's always a trade. You're always going to be sacrificing something, whether it's life or it's death or it's your time or it's your money. There's a
Mm.
sacrifice involved everywhere. And people don't think long term, but Christ did. Even before the foundation of the world, he was the lamb that was slain.
Yeah, I think people overlook the term sacrifice a lot, that it means giving up of something else. And so many times we just think of, in the Old Testament, they were just killing animals and the blood covered the people for whatever sin. But a sacrifice truly means to give up something, right?
Mhm. Yeah, that's why it's supposed to be the first fruits. It's supposed to be your best. Whenever
Yeah,
you make a sacrifice, you're supposed to feel it. So Jesus, whenever he sacrificed himself, he really felt it.
yeah, yeah.
So
When,
I'll read on the next verse here in Hebrews
yeah,
27. This is a really important one. And inasmuch as it is appointed for men to die once, and after this comes the judgment. So, like we were talking about earlier, not everybody gets that deathbed experience. We should all be expecting, hey, I'm going to die once. That's it. And then after that comes the judgment. So, every human that's going to die needs to be ready to be judged. It's not like in the reincarnation side of New Age things. I don't think the Bible teaches that. You need to be ready to be judged. And who is going to be judging you? It's going to be God. And you're going to have your life played out before you. Are you going to be ready at the throne of God to have be your own witness, or do your own advocate, or do you want Christ to be your advocate for you?
yeah, yeah, definitely. When you think about verses like absent from the body, present with the Lord, what do you think of?
Mhm. I think it happens instantly. When I think about that, I think you're instantly present with God. Because I'm instantly in my body right now. Currently, I'm not going to be anywhere else. So if I'm not in my body, I'm gonna just like that. I'm gonna be with God because there's no time that is gonna. There's not gonna be like a gap of time between the time that I'm here, my spirit is here in my flesh, and the time that my spirit is in the presence of God.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of people think about, am I going to sleep until Judgment Day? And I don't think that's what the Bible states. I feel like
Yeah.
you immediately skip into the next world, like your final breath here and your next breath there, period.
Yeah, and we talk about sleep because I think sleep is a really important thing that we define is referred to by Jesus. He looks at a dead little girl and he says, "Oh, she's not dead; she's asleep." Same with Lazarus; he's
Yes.
not dead; he's asleep. So that's the difference for a believer who is dead. Is there is going to be a wake up afterwards. It's not going to be a permanent sleep. It's not a permanent death. Now, for an unbeliever, it probably is accurate to say, yeah, they're asleep. They're not waking up. They're dead. They're not going to wake up. But for a believer, we have that wake up opportunity on the other side.
So, Sydney, let me take you back to the Old Testament again and talk
Yeah.
about Sheol for a moment. And a lot of
Okay. Yeah.
people don't really think about Sheol. And I remember the first time I heard that, and I'm like, okay, I've been reading the Bible my whole life, or at least I thought I was, but I wasn't familiar with that. And of course, there's even parables about it where you have the rich man and Lazarus, and there's a chasm, and there was good on one side and bad on the other, pretty much.
Yeah.
But can you talk about how may have changed when Jesus died?
When Jesus died, he was gone for a couple of days, about, 3 days. And during that time, he descended into Hades. And this is talked about in a couple of places in the New and the Old Testament. It's prophesied. So I think, let me find it. The place people can look if they want to study a little bit more. Where did Jesus go? He went down to the pit, is where I would describe it,
Right.
down to the pit. And Sheol is kind of over near. Sheol would just be outside of reality, basically, and it's referenced a lot to the underworld, as Hades. Um, and Jesus, whenever he went down there, he showed himself to the ruling entity. And now this may sound kind of woo-woo, it might sound kind of weird to people who haven't studied this, but Christ displayed himself and he said, "Look at me. You thought you killed me. Ha 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 ha." And he took, this is in Revelation 20, it says he took back the keys of death.
Yeah.
So Christ, whenever he died, the way he was able to defeat death is through taking back the keys of Hades, as it's described. So he poured himself out, it says in Isaiah, and he allotted a portion. And that portion is his spoils, basically. So he came back with the booty.
Yeah.
He defeated death. That was a war. It was a full-on war. And whenever he came back, he gave gifts to men, it says. He gave us gifts. So not only did Christ conquer death, but he has given us gifts that he took back. He brought us the gift of life.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, whenever you think about believers now, whereas previously believers and non-believers alike were in Sheol, do you feel
Yeah,
like that has changed? When we speak about, like, again,
right.
the absence from the body present with the Lord for at
I
least
think it has.
believers, right?
Yeah, I think it has changed because whenever Christ went down there and displayed himself to the ruling entities of death, there was a changing of authority. Jesus said, "Y'all aren't in charge anymore.
Yeah.
I'm in charge. Guess what? I defeated you." And so he kicked those guys out. And there's question who was there, who are the ruling authorities. I think the ruling authorities are basically the satanic hierarchy of fallen angels, but
Yeah.
um and some of them will return in the end times, like Apollyon, for example, Leviathan. But I think right now, kind of as it stands, it's a hard question to answer a little bit too, because you have the question of eternity and how does time interact with
Yes.
eternity.
Yes.
And can you imagine literally right now, the year 2025, existing in eternity in heaven? No, it doesn't, because the year 2025 isn't eternal. So whoever is in heaven at this moment on earth is a different time, a different way of experiencing time, and a different way of existing. And it's hard for us to comprehend. That's why I'm having a hard time explaining it.
Well, I'm gonna go really, really deep here, and I thought I was the only weird one that could think this way, but I was reading a book called Angels from Dr. David Jeremiah, and it
Oh, he's
is,
great.
yeah, there were so many, it was full of biblical references, and there's one chapter, and I read it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, his mind is as crazy as mine. But he was stating, for example, I believe my grandmother is in heaven, okay?
Yeah.
And if she's absent from the body, present with the Lord, she's already there. And in her timeline, which has no beginning or end anymore, has she already had her judgment? If the answer is yes, then, and if all judgment happens at the same time, am I already there with her in her timeline?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of me that thinks that, yes, that is a real possibility. You and I are bound by time.
Right.
Whereas believers who have gone on to be with the Lord there and have died here on earth, they are no longer bound by time, absent from the body,
Mm-hmm.
present with the Lord, into the
Mm-hmm.
new. And I don't know, it's kind of a wild way to think, but
Yeah. Well, it's
it was,
quantum. It's quantum mechanics
yeah,
because two things can be true at once, basically.
yes,
And it's the observer effect. So you and I are the observer of our eternal time. And it says, I think it's in First Corinthians, that we are seated in heavenly places. So that would be that quantum entanglement of time. Right now, I'm on earth, but in eternity, I am seated with Christ. So
yeah.
that is how we could have those two things be true at once.
Yes, yes. And I know that's a mind twist for a lot of
Hmm.
people, but I think for us, it brings on a strong measure of hope, that especially when we talk about, meeting up with other believers again in
Yeah.
eternity.
Well, I found the verse real quick. It's Ephesians 2:6, that we are raised up with him and seated with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus. Because right now we're just on earth. We're experiencing suffering, we're experiencing life and death and taxes and everything. But in eternity, we are seated with him.
Yeah.
It's a different, so that's why we have access to the throne also. It says in Hebrews to approach the throne of grace with boldness.
Hmm.
So you can approach the throne of grace with boldness because you are in heavenly places.
Wow. Yeah, that's a very, very strong statement and very comforting for sure.
It is because that means we have access, we have direct access to God. We don't have to go through a priest. We don't have to make a sacrifice. We have direct access to the throne because of what Christ did,
I've got
because he
this,
died once and for all.
yeah, I've got this really cool book, and I may have mentioned it to you in one of our previous conversations off the podcast, but it's called Grace for the Afflicted, and it looks at certain mental health disorders that would have shown up in certain people from the Bible based on their self-report and things that is spoken of in the Bible. But one of the things that I don't think is in that book is certainly grief. And when you think about how many people in the Bible were grieving, not only physical death, but there were a lot of, physical ailments and things like grieving the way their bodies used to be versus the way they are. But looking at from a physical death point, you've got obviously we've talked about before how the first parents had a murderer in the family and a dead son, and how do you deal with that? Like, so when we look at our own personal grief, we don't think that this has always been, right? That this has been there since the beginning of time. Then when we look at people like David, and due to his sin, his first
Mhm.
son was required of him, right? God took his son at least through Bathsheba,
Yeah.
and you've got David absolutely uh, torn up and tormented from the loss of this son, but it was a little bit different because it was attached to his sin, right?
Hmm.
Whenever I speak with parents who have lost a child, I try to separate some of that. Like it's, you look at there was the man that was outside of the city, and the disciples asked, who sinned, this man or his parents? And Jesus said, Not neither. It was for the glory of God."
Hmm.
When you think about death and reasoning behind certain things, do you feel like death is for a reason? It's hard to say that something happened for God's glory when we're talking about death, or when you look at David, when it was
Hmm.
required of him because of sin.
Hmm.
But what are your thoughts? I'm probably getting tangled up with too many thoughts in my own head here, but how do we
Yeah.
reconcile that with death?
It's the hardest question to answer, to be honest, because if you're going to deal with the death of a child or a baby, or that was in David's case, an infant, maybe it was a miscarriage, or I don't know how old he was, but David did have that hope that he would see his child again. So
Mm,
I think that's one way we can glorify God, is to have a relationship with him so we can have that hope of a future, that when we die, we'll not only be united with him when we die, but we'll be united with that loved one, with that child. Because I think he's a merciful God. And not only does he show mercy, but he shows grace. And I think it's in his love and his grace that he allows children and brings children into his open arms into heaven. So I think whenever you question the death of a child, the most horrible thing that could happen to any parent, anybody. I would hope that the way God could be glorified in that is that that parent, that person would seek a further relationship with God.
Yeah. And before the podcast started, I mentioned a couple of things that I wanted to hit, and one is I speak about how people aren't always helpful in our grieving process, and I look from the Bible at Job's friends, and I don't think they helped this man at all during his grief. Like I'm like these guys are not really good friends. What are your thoughts on that? Like when it comes to grief and people trying to help others and maybe some of the things that we say that just aren't beneficial.
I think it's usually better to keep your mouth closed than open. And I have a hard time with that personally. Um, I just want to talk and talk and talk. And sometimes that's actually the worst thing we can do. So I think people, they just need that a person to sit with them and to
Mm,
be near them, to be a hand to hold, a body to be close to. So that maybe you can help them, bring them a meal and tell them, hey, no pressure. I'm going to bring you a meal. I'm going to help you.
mm,
Let me do your laundry for you, rather
yeah.
than saying, hey, what can I do to help? Because people, even like in my experience, I just, I had a baby this year. And if people said, hey, what can I do to help? I'm like, oh, thanks. I'm fine. Even though, of course, I mean, if I really tried, I could tell them what to do. I'm good at delegating, but but it just feels awkward. And especially if you are going through a hard time, if you're grieving or you're recovering from a surgery or something, you don't want to just tell people what you need. They need to just volunteer themselves, really. If you really want to help somebody who's going through something, you could just go ahead and volunteer yourself. Bring them that coffee from Starbucks, bring them a pizza and a salad from the grocery store.
Yeah.
Sit with them, be there if they want you to be there. Sit with them, give them a hug. I think a lot of helpful moments are better left just silent.
Yeah.
And I'm talking to myself because I can close my mouth more than I open it.
I get that completely. I've got one more question and then I'll let you segue into whatever you want here. But my question is, why do you think God allows questioning in grief? And I'm going to give you two examples that I have. Psalm 22:1 says, why have you forsaken me? And of course, Jesus even says that. And then in Habakkuk, it says, how long must I call for help? And then even in Revelation, you see the martyrs who knew
Oh yeah.
they had been martyred and they asked God, like, how long before you avenge our blood? I think those are all questioning grief, even grief of death of self in these martyrs that we see. But why do you
Yeah.
think God allows the questioning?
I think part of it's because he gave us free will. He created us in his image as thoughtful beings,
Mm,
hopefully as a deep person, a deep thinker. I think God is a deep thinker, and the spirit searches the things of God. So whenever we ask these deep questions, it's important that we sit with it. We may never get to an answer. I
yeah.
don't, not everything has an answer. Sometimes you're meant to live with the question because that keeps you searching for the answer
Mm,
and hopefully searching for God.
sure. Sure. What else do you have on your plate there? I know you had a lot to talk about. Do you have more verses that you wanted to speak of?
Yeah, so Revelation 20 is one of my favorites. So it's the judgment. It's this epic scene, the end of a epic movie. And Jesus, he gets the key to the abyss, and then he comes down to earth with his armies, and then a great white throne descends. It's one of the more theatrical chapters in the Bible, certainly of Revelation, I think. In verse 13, it says, and the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead which were in them, and they were judged, every one of them according to their deeds.
Hmm.
I think it's interesting to think of them as separate locations, the sea gave up the dead, and death and Hades gave up the dead.
Yeah.
So I think Sheol, the pit, is part of the sea. And whenever Jonah, if you read Jonah, went down to the sea, his hair was entangled in the seaweed. He cried out to God from the bottom of the ocean. He died. Jonah is a Christophany. Jonah was dead. He was then in the belly of the fish for 3 days. And then he came back up on the other side, like Christ did, alive on the other side. It's because Jonah died. He died at the bottom of the sea. He was in chains of darkness. So is this kind of intersection of literally being in the ocean because he did drop down off of a boat and into the ocean, and he was also dead in the ocean. So it's just kind of it's if you think about the ocean as kind of a spooky place, there's a lot of weird things that happen, and most of the earth is covered in water. It's a separate location from death and Hades. So I think death and Hades, when they gave up the dead, that's probably more closely linked to what we were talking about earlier, like the Sheol location. So it is interesting if anybody wants to go down the sea rabbit hole. There's certainly a deep rabbit hole to go into. But in the end, the dead will be spit out basically to God to be judged. Every person, no matter where they end up in hell, wherever, will face the judgment of God. So then, reading on, verse 14. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. Then this is chapter 21. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there is no longer any sea. So whenever God comes back and renews the earth, there won't be an ocean. There will be no sea because the sea had death. To me, that's profound.
It is. It is. And most people that know me, and I've probably spoken of it 1,000 times on this podcast, I love being out on the ocean. I
Me
usually
too.
spend about 10% of my year out on the ocean. I love cruising. I love going to other countries, and I hate flying, so it is my best option. Um, but it is quite an interesting verse when it talks about the sea will be no more, basically, and
Yeah.
very, very interesting stuff. Um,
Yeah. I have a whole like section in my notebook just about the sea because it's all over the Bible. Like a lot of things, whenever you start digging in, then you start to see it and it's just all over the place. It's like if you're looking for a white Toyota Prius and then all of a sudden you see white Toyota Priuses all over
sure.
you. It's whenever you start to think about it and then you start to notice it, then you start to see it that
Yeah,
you never saw it before.
yeah. And you were talking about the sea being a scary place, and honestly, it is. Like when you're out there in the middle of nowhere and you don't see lights for miles, you don't see lights, period. It is kind of a scary place. And to know
Hmm.
that if something goes wrong, um, and I have been in a really bad storm. In fact, anybody that wants to look it up. Just Google my name and Carnival Sunshine, and you're going to find me on a bunch of newscasts where we were in a really, really bad storm. And I had posted some video on Twitter at the time, now X, and we got picked up by a bunch of news stations. And next thing I know, I'm on Newsmax and CBS Morning and all kinds of other news
Wow.
stations. Yeah, so it's the ocean can be a really scary place.
How tall were the waves?
I don't even know. I've got all the data. I'd have to look up. But I had some guy on X contact me and state, "Wow, they did you a big injustice there. Basically, taking us through hurricane force winds, and we docked like almost a whole day after what we were supposed to. We just sat out and just treaded water for hours, not
That's
moving.
terrifying.
Yeah."
That's really terrifying.
Yeah,
Sorry you had
and
to go through that. That's crazy.
well, it was really you talk about a lesson of trust.
Mm.
And literally, we were sent to our rooms, and I don't know, it's probably about 1 o'clock in the morning. Me and my wife just said, "All right, let's pray." And we prayed, and honest to goodness, I slept like a baby.
Yeah.
And, every once in a while we would hit a ginormous wave that would kind of wake me up or stir me. But I remember waking back up about 6 or 7 in the morning, and it's like um, I had some kind of peace. I mean, I wasn't trying to play the role of Jesus, and the all the disciples are all scared, and
Yeah.
but honestly, I had peace, and I was sleeping like a baby. So
Wow. That's an incredible story. I
it
want to see
was.
those videos.
Yeah. I'll definitely send them. But like I said, just yeah, Google Brad Morrell and Carnival
Okay.
Sunshine, and
Carnival
you will,
Sunshine.
yeah, you'll
Let me
find
write
it.
that.
I forget.
All
It's
right.
been about 3 years ago now. It was in, I think, May, and I don't know. Just it was really really interesting. So what else
All
do you
right.
have on grief and death there? I know
So
we're
we'll
closing in
finish
on our
up.
time.
This is probably the most famous verse. You'll hear this at any funeral, most likely, especially a funeral for a Christian. This is 1 Corinthians 15, and it's quoting the Old Testament. 15:55. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us a victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. And it's just an ending, but it's not the ending, it's the beginning. Because whenever you take the sting out of something, the hurt is still there, but it doesn't quite sting as much anymore. So we still have that death that's all going to happen to us, but the sting of it is gone because Christ took that away.
Yeah. Amen. That's good stuff. Um, when you think about your own mortality, Sydney, when you read these things, does it give you comfort, or do you still have maybe a healthy fear of death?
I hope I have a healthy fear of death. I have a family to take care of. I don't live recklessly. I do speed on the road sometimes, but
Not through school zones, right? Not through.
oh no, just rural highways,
I'm just kidding.
highways that go on into the horizon. It feels like they're never ending.
Hmm.
Like just gotta get through this space of the desert. But death, where's your victory? Death, where is your sting? No, I look at death as hopefully something to look forward to, and because I know what's on the other side. I know the arms of God is on the other side. I know I'm already seated in heavenly places. So there really isn't much of a transition period because technically speaking, we're already there.
Yeah. And when you think about in Revelation, I think it's Revelation 21, God's wiping away all tears.
Yeah.
Now, I encourage women and men alike here on earth to go ahead and cry.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I've said it at least 30 times on this podcast that in our tear is a neurotransmitter called leucine and enkephalin, which is a painkiller. And I'm like, how
Wow.
cool is it that God thought about giving us a painkiller? So when we cry, that's why we feel better.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow. That's really good. Yeah.
yeah, but in heaven, we're not going to need that anymore. And God
Yeah.
wipes away all tears. And we hear that also said at funerals quite
Mhm.
often. What are your thoughts on that? That there's no need for tears anymore.
Well, I think that means that there will be an initial tear in order
Sure.
for Christ to wipe it away. So maybe we look at our life and we wish we had done something better or differently. Or maybe we look at who is around us in heaven and we think, oh, I wish somebody else was here that isn't here with me. So it could be something like that, that we have maybe a regret or that we look back on our life and we still have some sadness that is residual, maybe some serious things that went on in our life, or maybe we're crying still from the way that we died. Maybe whenever you get to the other side, maybe you had a horrible death getting
Mm.
there.
Yeah, I
It's
like to
not a
think,
painless transition, perhaps. I don't know.
sure. I do believe that maybe you're onto something when you talk about either the things that I did that are embarrassing or the things that I didn't do that I wish I would have. You know, a lot of
Yeah.
regret, and I think that is certainly. Um, I've always wondered, will we know uh, our friends who never became believers? Will that be something that we're even aware of? And I don't know. It's a good question, but it is interesting. Like when I go back to the martyrs that are in Revelation, there's at least an awareness of what's going on here on
Yeah.
earth. They know that whoever killed them has not died yet because they're
Hmm.
asking God, how long before your justice, right?
Right.
So I do believe that there is an awareness of what's going on in heaven.
Yeah. It could
And
be that like, those martyrs, they're still crying from their death. They had a horrible death and they're crying out for justice, and God wipes away their tear. In that instance, he wipes away their sorrows.
so, Sydney, I'm going to stretch our minds here for a second and go into that. So, if the martyrs, we'll say, are living in no timeline, as
Hmm.
we've discussed before, how would they have knowledge of what is still in time?
I think the timeline of things is whenever God mm, looks at this existence, he's looking at it from outside of it. So
Mhm.
you could think of it as a video game. God is the creator of the video game program or movie or something like that. He's looking at it from this perspective away from him. And so he presses play and he watches it all the way through. But he didn't make anything happen. He just pressed play. And then the people that were, the actors, us, real life people living, are the ones that he's watching. So it
Mhm.
could be that the people are on the other side that have died, they're on that side of God with him, and they pressed play, but maybe they can't see all the way into the future yet. Maybe they can
Understood.
only see like to rewind or press pause, but maybe they can only go so far playing it. Does
Gotcha.
that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what kind of thoughts do you have closing us out here? It's, man, an hour went by
Yeah.
really quickly.
Yeah, it's a good conversation. I encourage people to read the Book of Romans if they haven't. I feel like the Book of Romans, besides the story of Christ and maybe the Gospel of John, is one of the more important books to read in the New Testament. Genesis can be a lot to handle for some people. It's just a lot of people doing stuff. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
But to go deep, whenever you're feeling that grief, cry out to God. Like, I think that's why we have that access to God through grief. Blessed are those who are mourning because they'll be comforted, is what Jesus says. So if you're mourning right now, use that as a leverage to reach out and grow that relationship with God. Maybe you haven't had a relationship with God before in your life and you're really struggling. Now is the time. Today is the day for salvation, and now is the time to use that grief to turn a new chapter into your life and have a relationship with the creator of the universe.
Yeah. And I want to say on that verse that you just mentioned there, Sydney, that the Bible says, blessed are those who mourn. It doesn't say, blessed are those who grieve. And grief is what
Mm,
we feel on the inside. Mourning is an outward pouring of that grief. So I feel like it's important for us to express what we're feeling on the inside. That's where I think the blessing truly occurs.
yeah, don't hold it in. Don't numb. So many people just want to numb out. I mean, I want to numb out sometimes. I just want to watch Gilmore Girls and eat popcorn,
I
just
can
as an
agree on the
example.
popcorn, but I've never watched Gilmore
That's it.
Girls, so
Yeah,
I
it's
know what
not for
it is.
everybody. We all have that show or that
Yeah,
movie. You just want to numb out and just ignore. But God wants to reach out to us in our emotions, through our spirit, through our soul. Comfort for the soul. It comes through the spirit.
yeah. Sydney, it's been a pleasure, and I hope that everybody's been blessed by your words. And
Thank you.
Certainly we'll have to do it again sometime.
Yeah, I want to do a part two for sure. We can go into maybe like the Greek understanding versus the Hebrew understanding and different traditions and ways of mourning and things like that.
Awesome. Well,
Thank you so
listeners,
much, Brad.
yeah, thank you. And listeners, thanks for tuning in to another episode. And I will have Sydney's information in the show notes. And that way, if you want to find her on TikTok, and of course, send me an email if you would like to be on the show as well. Hope you have a great day, everyone.